Welcome, my dear listeners. Gather around the fire. Come a little closer so that the stories from these Tigris from minds of years ago can seep into your soul. And allow me to take you to the rich lands of Mesopotamia. Can you feel it? The scent of the earth fills the air, for these lands are no ordinary lands. Here the first steps of civilization were taken. Humanity built cities in these fertile fields, established laws, spoke with gods, and ultimately created the great civilizations known to the world today. So those civilizations still illuminate our past. The story I'm about to tell you is the first great tale of humanity. This is Mesopotamia, the land nestled between two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, where life flourished, and the earth was always bounteous. The floods of these rivers blessed the people while also testing them. We're traveling back thousands of years to the first city-states, where agriculture was first discovered, trade began among people. Writing was born, laws were shaped, and it was believed the gods ruled from the heavens, order from the sin. But wait, it didn't all happen at once. When people first arrived in these lands, they were merely hunter-gatherers. They would chase after prey, gather fruits, and migrate from place to place. So how did these people, while struggling against nature, manage to establish such a vast and complex society? The answer to that question lies in patience, intelligence, and a little twist of the rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates are the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. These rivers brought life to the lands every year, but they also carried great disasters. Sometimes, as they irrigated the fields, they would overflow and devastate everything. But human ingenuity found solutions to these whims of nature. The first farmers managed to tame these rivers. Agriculture began. This was the first great victory in humanity's struggle against nature. And this victory compelled humanity to live together. No longer could they work alone. They needed to collaborate as communities. Such cooperation laid the foundations for cities. Those cities grew over time, adorned with monumental structures. Temples, marketplaces, palaces, each one sparkled with the brilliance of a civilization. But there were not only humans living in every city, the gods were there too. Each city had its own god, who protected and empowered it. The people prayed to their gods, offered sacrifices, and worked tirelessly to earn their favor. The wrath of those gods. If a god became angry, the calamities that befell the city would be relentless. Thus, pleasing their gods became the greatest duty of the people. However, Mesopotamia was not just filled with gods. Kings, warriors, merchants, scholars, each played a part in this story. And now we shall embark on a journey to those times. We will rediscover each city, every battle, every god. Why did people have to fight? When did the gods rage in anger? How did the kings rule? And ultimately, how did Mesopotamia become home to humanity's first civilizations? I will take you deep into the heart of these lands. Because this story is not just about Mesopotamia, it's also our story. Feel as though you are listening to an old sage. For I have witnessed every event that unfolded in these lands. I am here to share it with you. Are you ready? Then let's begin. My dear listeners, now close your eyes and imagine. You're witnessing the wonders of nature in one of the world's oldest lands. Mesopotamia, just the name sounds magical, doesn't it? A world between two rivers. But this is no ordinary place. This is the heart of civilization. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. On one side flows the Tigris, and on the other, the Euphrates. These two powerful rivers flow through these lands like the veins of the earth, bringing life. They not only provide water, they carry the seeds of civilization, science, religions, and cities. Yes, here we stand in the very heart of Mesopotamia. These two rivers are anything but ordinary. Think about it. These rivers start their journey from distant mountains, crossing dry and harsh terrains before finally reaching Mesopotamia. The Tigris is tempestuous. Sometimes it overflows, sweeping everything away in its path. The Euphrates flows more calmly, serenely. Yet both are the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. Before people settled around these rivers, they lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers. But when these two rivers offered them fertile lands, that's when they transitioned to a settled lifestyle. And it was at that moment that the seeds of civilization were sown. The waters carried by the Tigris and Euphrates do more than irrigate the land. They also bring people together. Rivers are nature's greatest gift to humanity here. But like every gift, they must be used wisely. Every year, these two rivers flood, destroying the surrounding fields and homes. But do you know what happened? Despite these floods, people did not abandon these lands. Instead, they learned to tame the rivers. They built dams, irrigation channels, and levees. Thus, they transformed the rivers into sources of power. And around these rivers, cities rose, populations grew, and trade flourished. Thanks to the gifts of these two rivers, Mesopotamia became the first great agricultural society in human history. Once agriculture began, it did not stop. In those fertile lands, wheat thrived, and barley fields danced in the wind. People no longer had to rely solely on gathering food from nature. With the knowledge of farming, they could store food and build large families. What did this mean? Thanks to agriculture, people settled down. Those who remained on the land built homes, villages, and eventually great cities. The fertile lands between these two rivers are known as the Fertile Crescent. This region, shaped like a crescent moon, stretches out like a bow. And this crescent encompasses not just Mesopotamia, but also the surrounding territories. The Fertile Crescent is the site of not only agriculture, but also the first great revolutions in human history. It's where cities were founded, writing was invented, laws were drafted, and religions were born. What stories lie within this Fertile Crescent? Here we witness the sprouting of a great civilization for the first time in human history. But the blessings of the Fertile Crescent lie not only in its soil. What ensures the permanence of life here is the life-giving water of the rivers and the determination and intelligence of these people. The first farmers, the first rulers, the first scientists lived here. These individuals found ways to cope with the floods brought by the floods. By establishing irrigation systems, they made agriculture more efficient. They harvested more from the fields, cities expanded, and populations grew. All of this was made possible because of these rivers, and thus began the story of Mesopotamia. These lands were just a beginning, and that beginning left a mark on world history. Here kings rose, gods reigned, and laws were written. Everything started in these lands brought to life by the Tigris and Euphrates. The Fertile Crescent became the cradle of civilization. Now we will dive into the stories of the cities that grew around these two rivers. For here, not only the land blossomed, but so did the people. And the tales of these people will resonate through will be centuries, echoing even in the deepest corridors of history. Are you ready? Because this is just the beginning? Yes, Cradle, Hoyuk, and Göbekli Tepe. Don't you feel a stir within you just hearing those names? These places mark the very beginnings of humanity, where the first communities came together to learn how to live side by side. But believe me, these settlements were not merely piles of stones. No, dear friends, these were lands where revolutionary steps in human history were taken. They are so profound, holding secrets that stretch back thousands of years. Every stone, every piece of earth tells a story. Now, let me tell you a tale about the moment when humanity changed its relationship with nature. Imagine our ancestors wandering as hunter-gatherers in forests and mountains, coming to a halt at some point in their nomadic lives. Why? Because fertile lands offered them an opportunity. This was no ordinary chance. The land provided them food, they were given seeds, and agriculture began. Agriculture. With that first step taken during this period, one of humanity's greatest revolutions commenced. Çatalhöyük, located in the heart of Anatolia, in the Konya Plain. This city is one of the oldest settlements in history, but it's not just a simple settlement. Çatalhöyük is where humanity discovered the concept of a city. But think about it, people came together here for the first time, building their homes side by side. Yes, I said homes, because these weren't just four walls. Here people constructed spaces that belonged to them, lives that were interconnected. This settlement, still standing today, is a living testament to how human beings shaped collective life. Imagine houses made of mud, a life earned from the earth. People no longer had to migrate. The wheat and barley they planted in their fields provided them with enough food. They domesticated animals and learned to utilize them. Thus, the agricultural revolution began, transforming into a great event that brought people together and shaped societies. And so cities were born. These cities were not merely places for shelter, they also became centers for beliefs, rituals, and artistic creations. Because when people learned to satisfy their hunger, they find new pursuits. And those pursuits began right here, in Çatalhöyük. But dear friends, something entirely different was happening at Göbekli Tepe. The construction of one of the world's oldest temples. Now close your eyes and travel back thousands of years. Imagine we are standing on the lands of Sanliurfa. Before you, colossal stone pillars rise. Those stones were crafted by human hands, sculpted with care. And believe me, each figure, each carving on these pillars carries meaning. The secrets of Göbekli Tepe are still not fully understood. But one thing is clear, humanity was not just satisfying its hunger, it was also building its spiritual world. Here, people constructed temples to communicate with their gods and to find meaning in nature and the universe. The massive stone structures of Göbekli Tepe show us how deeply rooted the belief systems of the people were at that time. Just think, how did people build such grand temples when cities didn't even exist yet? Why did they invest so much effort? Here, the great revolution provided by agriculture and settled life comes into play. When the hardships of a nomadic life ended, people could devote their time and energy to their beliefs, rituals, and social relationships. Thanks to agriculture, they moved beyond mere survival and began to explore what it meant to be human. And so, my dear listeners, these early settlements, Katahoyok and Göbekli Tepe, symbolize one of the most significant turning points in Nefertiti. The agricultural revolution not only changed how people would feed themselves, it also determined how societies would shape, how cities would be built, and how belief systems would develop. Hidden beneath the columns of Göbekli Tepe was a faith. Within the homes of Katahoyuk, a community life was sprouting, and these burgeoning lives were great steps that propelled humanity toward civilization. These steps were taken on the road leading to the golden ages of Mesopotamia. Everything started in these lands. With the agricultural revolution, people settled down, formed communities, and built cities. And these cities would transform into the greatest civilizations in human history. But this is just the beginning. We have many more stories to share, and we'll delve even deeper. Yes, my dear friends, every step taken by the first humans in these settlements shaped human history, and these lands continue to resonate through the depths of history. Are you ready? Because this story is just beginning. The Sumerians, Uruk, Lagash. Now I am taking you to the land where time began, where civilization sprouted. The land where the first great cities of humanity were born. Imagine great cities rising in the middle of the desert, cities built on the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, finding fertile lands for themselves, forming the essence of civilization. Close your eyes and hear the noise of those times. Imagine people strolling through the marketplaces, streets between houses made of mud, priests walking on the roads leading to temples. The people of that time built houses, temples, and cities for themselves. But these cities were not just for shelter, they were the centers of the spirit, lifestyle, and beliefs of the Sumerian people. The first city to be mentioned is Ur. Ur was a magnificent city in the heart of Mesopotamia. Close-knit buildings, narrow streets, and temples. Ur was not just a city, but a capital witnessing the birth of an empire. The people living within its walls had the most advanced agricultural and irrigation techniques of the time. So much so that this city had become the center of the region not only economically but also culturally and religiously. Its kings were strong, its people brave, but perhaps most importantly their faith was deep. Uruk, the city famous for its gigantic walls. Uruk was one of the greatest cities in human history. Imagine a city surrounded by high walls, so big that these walls were kilometers long. The people of this city not only practiced agriculture, but also art, trade, and wisdom flourished here. Perhaps what makes Uruk stand out the most is its king, the hero Gilgamesh, who is often mentioned in mythologies. Gilgamesh, who is remembered in Uruk as one of the most powerful leaders of that period, was also the hero of one of the first great epics of humanity. In this city, epics were written, myths were born, and the imagination of the people knew no bounds. Lagash was an important political center of Sumerian civilization. Amidst the power struggles of neighboring city-states, Lagash managed to preserve its identity. Wars, peace treaties, and alliances between cities took shape here. Lagash was both a city of warriors and diplomats. Every decision, every alliance required wisdom. Because in those times, each city-state was like a kingdom in its own right, each independent yet interdependent. Imagine how agriculture and trade flourished in these cities, such prosperity and abundance at the dawn of time. But my friends, Sumerian cities were not only famous for their high walls and strong leaders. No, these cities had massive structures that soared high into the sky, ziggurats. Ziggurats, those huge temples symbolized the Sumerian people's deep faith in the gods. Imagine a ziggurat, a temple built floor by floor, rising as far as the eye can see. Each floor built to be a little closer to the gods. These ziggurats were not just temples. They were sacred bridges built by the Sumerians to communicate with the gods. The ziggurats were the homes of the gods who protected the city. Every day, people gathered around this massive structure, praying and making offerings to their gods to protect them. These magnificent structures were not only architectural marvels, but also reflections of the Sumerian spirit. Each floor of the ziggurats reflected the great belief systems of the time. Priests would go up to the top floor of the ziggurats and talk to the gods. People whispered their prayers below, waiting for the mercy of the gods. Inside those stone walls, on those stone steps, the beliefs of the Sumerian people took shape. But perhaps the greatest invention of the Sumerians was cuneiform writing. My friends, the first written languages in the history of mankind were born in these lands. Just think about it. Signs carefully engraved on stone tablets, At first they were simple signs used to indicate field boundaries, crop quantities, or tax records. But over time these signs took on a greater meaning. With these simple signs, people began to record not only their commercial transactions but also their thoughts, prayers, and stories. And so cuneiform became the Sumerians' way of making sense of the world and passing it on to future generations. What is not among these cuneiform tablets? Prayers to the gods, trade agreements, heroic epics. Especially great works such as the Gilgamesh epic emerged in this land for the first time in the history of human literature. Cuneiform became the voice of the Sumerian people. They built a bridge that reached future generations. They engraved their era, their beliefs, and their lives on these stones. And so the Sumerian city-states came to prominence not only for their power but also for the cultural and religious structures they created. The majestic ziggurats of Ur, the gigantic walls of Uruk, and the wise kings of Lagash wrote the first great stories of human history. And these stories were engraved in stone with cuneiform writing and bequeathed to future generations. The Sumerians laid the foundations of civilization. Those foundations were the stones on which human history was built. This, my friends, is how the Sumerian city-states were born. Do you feel the breeze of those ancient times now? Do you hear the prayers of the priest walking in the shadow of the ziggurats? If you do, know that history is whispering something to you, and these whispers come from the deepest roots of human history. Ah, my friends, I have a tale to share that carries deep insights about the spirit of the times, the nature of humanity, and the roots of justice. Look back to those distant times on the dusty roads of Mesopotamia, where cities were growing, kings were reigning, and peoples were learning to live together. However, living together wasn't easy. Chaos, uncertainty, and injustice lurked at every corner. It was at this point that humanity showed the courage to put justice into writing, for without written laws, order could not be established. Think about it, society is like a river. If the river flows freely and unchecked, it can destroy everything, creating floods. But if you dig channels and create pathways for that river, you can direct the water where you want it to go and benefit from it. Written laws were like those channels, providing structure to society. Each law inscribed became a bridge among the people, a voice for justice. In the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, humanity began to lay the foundations of this justice for the first time. They say words fly away, but what is written remains. That's why, starting with the Sumerians, many civilizations began carving their laws onto clay tablets. Everything from the crops grown by farmers to the goods traded by merchants. Even the offerings presented to gods was put into writing. And disputes over field boundaries or whether debts were repaid could no longer be argued. Everything was clearly inscribed on stone tablets. However, my friends, the person who reached the pinnacle of these written laws, perhaps the most famous lawgiver in history, was Hammurabi, the great king of Babylon. Hammurabi, he had such a strong will to uphold justice that even today his name is synonymous with it. He sat on a throne, but he was not just a king, he was also a sage. He burned with a desire to protect the rights of every person in his land, to maintain order and peace. One day Hammurabi sat in the magnificent palace of Babylon, listening to the complaints of his people. Each person had a different issue. A farmer complained that his neighbor had damaged his field. A merchant was complaining about another merchant who hadn't paid his debt. In that moment, Hammurabi realized he needed to take action for his people, to live in peace and security. The laws to be inscribed on stone tablets would apply to all the people of Babylon. No one could stand above the law, and neither the rich nor the poor, neither the noble nor the common folk. Everyone had to obey these laws. One day Hammurabi proclaimed his laws in a grand ceremony. Picture that enormous stone monument in your mind. Hammurabi stands before the god Shamash, holding a scepter, and the stones symbolizing justice are laid out before the eyes of the people. 282 articles. Yes, he inscribed exactly 282 articles on those stones. Each one touched upon every aspect of life, a first in history. These laws covered everything from agricultural work to trade agreements, from marriages to inheritance issues. Hammurabi told his people, no one can escape justice. No one shall suffer injustice. So what did these laws teach us, my friends? Hammurabi's understanding of justice was simple. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If someone damaged another's property, they would receive the same in return. If a merchant delayed paying his debt, justice would find him. But of course, there was a measure for every situation. For instance, there were differences between the harm done to a noble and that done to a common farmer. Yet still, people from all walks of life were considered equal under these laws. The same punishment wouldn't apply to everyone, but everyone had a right. That was certain. Hammurabi's laws were not just about punishment, my friends. They were also a regulation for societal progress and peaceful living. It was a system that protected everyone's rights and ensured social harmony. People felt safe and lived in peace where there was justice. Now think about the impact these laws had on the people. Now everyone knew that if they were wronged, there was a system they could turn to. Did a dispute arise over field boundaries? They could immediately refer to the laws. Did a merchant feel deceived? The laws would be on his side. Justice had come to life in Hammurabi's hands. As time passed, these laws resonated not just in Babylon, but throughout all of Mesopotamia. Hammurabi's concept of justice transcended borders and became an example for kings and rulers for centuries. Those monuments, those stone tablets remind us of this great king's commitment to justice. Whether people realized it or not, these laws were a revolution, laying the foundation of civilization upon justice and building a strong society on those principles. And so, my friends, this is how Hammurabi's laws were championed. His understanding of justice echoed not only in his own time, but also in the ages that followed. He stood against every injustice, a king who protected the rights of his people. And today those stone tablets still tell us one of humanity's greatest stories of justice. My dear friends, now I will tell you about the whispers of the gods echoing in the Mesopotamia, the prayers echoing in the depths of the temples and the power of the ancient priests. This land was the birthplace not only of civilizations, but also of gods. As from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon, this land was shaped under the patronage of the gods. In each city, each civilization worshipped their own gods and directed their prayers to them. But these gods were not distant, inaccessible. On the contrary, they were close to the people, as if they were walking beside a king, a warrior, or a farmer. So we should first talk about the gods of the Sumerians. Sumer. The people who raised the majestic walls of Uruk, the inventors of agriculture and writing, brought their gods down from the heavens. The greatest of the gods was Enlil. He was powerful like a storm, relentless like the wind. According to the Sumerians, Enlil was the creator of the heavens and the earth. His breath created the wind, and his anger gave birth to storms. Enlil was the king of the gods, the ruler of the heavens, the master of the world. Even the mention of his name struck fear into hearts. But not only with fear, but also with respect, because people knew that his power was the source of order in life. And then Enki, oh wise Enki. He was the god of fresh water, wisdom, and crafts. While the other gods were known for their anger, Enki was the protector of the people, the symbol of knowledge and creativity. If water canals were opened and agriculture spread, it was thanks to Enki. He taught people how to farm and how to build cities. With Enki's wisdom, the Sumerian people progressed and prospered. My respect for him as a sage is infinite, because, my friends, you know that he who holds wisdom brings prosperity to his people. But perhaps one of the most interesting figures in this ancient pantheon was Ishtar. Ishtar's goddess of love and war. Known for both her charm and her destructive power, this goddess appeared as a soldier on the battlefields and as a lover in the intoxicating moments of love. Ishtar seduced kings and led armies with her irresistible power. Both fear and passion were felt at the mention of her name. She was the embodiment of feminine power, a power that both created and destroyed. In the red dust of war, Ishtar's cries echoed, and in love, her name was whispered. Now, my friends, the influence of these gods was felt not only in mythologies and legends, but also in everyday life. Huge temples rising in the center of cities were dedicated to these gods. These temples were not only places of worship, they were also centers where the people were governed and social and economic decisions were made. These gigantic structures, called ziggurats, were raised towards the sky in order to be closest to the gods. Step by step, these temples symbolized the devotion of both the people and the priests to the gods. The largest and most magnificent of these temples was the famous ziggurat of Babylon. This structure, stretching towards the sky, was meant to be like a staircase to ascend to the level of the gods. But my friends, never forget this, it was the priests who held the power of these gods and temples in their hands. Yes, the priests were the bridge between the gods and the people. These priests were the most powerful figures in society, delivering the messages of the gods to their people, offering their prayers to the gods. They were not only religious leaders, they also made political and economic decisions. The power of the priest was the power of the gods. When a priest spoke on behalf of the god Enlil, it was as if Enlil himself was speaking. Therefore, the word of the priests was sacred and their orders were unquestionable. So what kind of life did these priests lead? They were responsible for maintaining order in accordance with the will of the gods. Ceremonies that started at first light of the day, prayers, offerings, sacrifices left on altars. Everything was to please the gods. Because if the gods were not pleased, famine could strike, rivers could overflow, or wars could break out. The priests constantly offered sacrifices to the gods and glorified them with prayers to protect the people from all these calamities. But my friends, the power of the priests was felt not only inside the temples, but in every corner of the city. Taxes were collected, agricultural products were divided, trade routes were organized, and the priests had a say in all these processes. They were the representatives of the gods on earth, which placed them at the highest level of society, so much so that even kings hesitated to take major decisions without the approval of the priests. Because if a king lost the support of the gods, he could lose both the throne and the people. In all these lands from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon, the gods spoke through priests, made their decisions, and determined the fate of civilization. Although the names of these gods changed over time, their influence on the people and the power of the priests remained the same. In every corner of Mesopotamia, the shadow of the gods was felt. In every temple, in every ceremony, their presence echoed. And it was this relationship between gods and priests, my friends, that formed the basis of Mesopotamian civilizations. The gods were powerful, and the priests were the hands that channeled their power. People worshipped the gods with both fear and reverence, and lived their lives under the guidance of priests. The story of this ancient pantheon has transcended time, extending to the present day, because the traces of the gods echo through the lands of Mesopotamia even today. Ah, dear friends, now I will take you to the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, where the first great empire was established, the Akkadian Empire, a force that echoed throughout the depths of history and changed not just Mesopotamia, but the course of all humanity. Now close your eyes and imagine a vast expanse of land, with a cool breeze blowing between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In this land there were small city-states at odds with each other, each worshipping its own gods and setting its own rules. But one day these scattered peoples came together, and the first great empire in history, the Akkadian Empire, was born. This tale is like a great river nourished by many local streams, a story of a greatness fed by many local powers. King Sargon of Akkad, what a great leader he was. Sargon was not only a powerful warrior, but also a brilliant strategist and a ruler known for his intellect. During his reign, the cities began to stop warring with each other, started to unite under a strong central authority. As Sargon gathered Mesopotamia under one flag, he ruled these lands with an iron fist, and for the first time in history, a single power began to dominate such a vast territory. But dear friends, the order Sargon established was not just a military success, it was also a cultural revolution. Imagine that the Sumerian city-states had been isolated for centuries. Each one worshipped its own gods and clung to its own culture. Cities like Uruk, Uruk, and Lagash were known for their independence. But Sargon established a connection among these cities. He transported Sumerian culture to Akkad and spread Akkadian culture to the Sumerian cities. Here, my friends, began a unique cultural interaction in history. The gods of the Sumerians began to resonate in the prayers of the Akkadians. The famous cuneiform script of Sumerians was carved onto the walls of Akkadian palaces. As the Akkadians learned the crafts, art, and sciences of the Sumerians admired the military organization and governance system of the Akkadians. But this cultural interaction was not merely an exchange. It was also a fusion, a blending. The ziggurats of the Sumerians became sacred places for the Akkadians as well. The god Enlil became a deity for both the Sumerians and the Akkadians, and so these two great peoples shared each other's beliefs, arts, languages, and tradition. The process Sargon initiated did not just create an empire, it also ushered in the cultural golden age in Mesopotamia. Imagine priests from Sumer praying in Akkadian places and Sumerian artists crafting statues for the Akkadian king. Akkadian soldiers would pray at the ziggurats built by the Sumerians. As these two great civilizations nourished one another, the power of Mesopotamia grew even stronger. The Akkadians, combined with the deep wisdom of the Sumerians, gave rise to a unique culture in these lands. Everything from writing systems to religious rituals, from architecture to crafts, was reshaped by this cultural interaction. However, like every great power, the Akkadian Empire eventually came to an end. The kings who followed Sargon struggled to maintain his legacy. Civil wars and external threats weakened the empire. But my friends, even the fall of the Akkadians could not sever the bonds between these two great people. The Sumerians and Akkadians continued to share a common culture even after the empire crumbled. And this is one of the greatest legacies of Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire is remembered not just as a political power, but as a cultural revolution. The values that these two peoples contributed to one another formed the spirit of Mesopotamia for centuries. So dear friends, this is the story of the first great empire of Mesopotamia and the cultural richness that flourished in its shadow. Close your eyes and imagine wandering through those lands. Stroll through the Akkadian Sumerian cities, accompanied by the cool waters of the Euphrates and the roaring flow of the Tigris. With each step, feel how one culture touched another in the depths of these historic lands. The union of the Akkadians and Sumerians wrote the fate of Mesopotamia, and we continue to tell this ancient tale. Babylon, a shining jewel of the ancient world, located in the heart of Mesopotamia, an empire lost in the dark recesses of time, but still alive in our minds with legends told for centuries. The rise of Babylon may have begun with the great king Hammurabi, but it was during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar that Babylon really made its name and glory known. Babylon was not just a city at that time, it was the peak of a civilization. It had become one of the greatest cities that history has ever witnessed, a center that made the hearts of both friends and enemies tremble with its gigantic walls, magnificent spice cart. In Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Babylon was known not only for its military might, but also for its cultural wealth. It was during this period that a legend emerged, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, gardens that people talk about with admiration, but whose existence is still debated. Many consider the Hanging Gardens to be one of the 7 wonders of the world, but unfortunately we have no solid evidence of what it actually looked like. Nevertheless, imagine a city soaring into the blue sky, huge palaces, towers, and gardens standing like a miracle in the middle of it. Colorful flowers, exotic plants, trees, a majestic green canopy whose branches extend beyond the high walls of Babylon. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built these gardens for his homesick wife Amidus. These gardens symbolized a king's loyalty to the woman he loved and the importance he attached to one of the world's greatest civilizations. Who knows, maybe it was a love story as great as Babylon's wealth and splendor. The legends of Babylon are not limited to the Hanging Gardens. Another legend of the city is the Tower of Babel, which resonates in many cultures even today. Here lies a myth and symbolism so profound that when you begin to describe it, your words become tangled, for it is precisely this tower that is known as the source of language confusion and disagreement. The Tower of Babel was a gigantic structure that was thought to have been built to reach God. People's attempt to reach God symbolized their arrogance, their desire to push their limits. But God did not tolerate this arrogance and punished them by dividing them into different languages. Suddenly unable to understand each other, they were unable to work together, and the construction of the tower was left unfinished. This tower was not just a building. It symbolized man's ambition for unlimited power and his desire to defy the will of nature and God. Today, the Tower of Babel is still considered a profound part of cultural heritage, a world where people did not understand each other, divided into languages, and eventually descended into chaos. Ever since, this story has been a reminder to humanity of how dangerous arrogance and excessive ambition can be. The rise of Babylon resonates to this day, not only for its military victories, but also for its cultural and symbolic meanings. While the Hanging Gardens reveal the love of a king and the aesthetic power of his civilization, the myth of the Tower of Babel represents the human desire to push the limits and its consequences. Babylon was not just a city or an empire, it was a legend, a symbol, and a mirror of humanity's greatest desires and failures. The trade routes, those arteries that connect civilizations and allow not only goods but also ideas, cultures, and beliefs to flow. Mesopotamia was located exactly at the intersection of these roads. Founded on the fertile soil of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this civilization grew and strengthened not only with agriculture and irrigation systems, but also with trade. In these lands, people shaped not only their livelihood but also their future. But remember, it is impossible to ignore the role of trade routes in the rise of every great civilization. Mesopotamia was a crossroads between east and west, north and south. It was at the heart of the vast trade networks that extended to what is today Iran, Turkey, Syria, and even Egypt. So much so that the merchants who set out from Mesopotamia at that time would bring with them the wealth and knowledge of other civilizations along with the goods they carried. Precious metals such as gold, silver, and copper, spices, precious stones, and exotic goods. But the most important aspect of trade was not only the exchange of physical goods. Knowledge was also carried through these routes, and innovations were passed from one civilization to another. In the markets of Babylon, Assyria, or Sumer, Not only goods but also knowledge and culture were traded. The markets in Mesopotamia were the center of this trade, the places where it all began. Imagine for a moment crowded streets, people strolling among the stalls, the voices of merchants, the smell of spices, and the intense aroma of leatherwork. The great cities of Mesopotamia, such as Uruk, Babylon, and Nineveh, were also home to great trade markets. Here, people from different civilizations met and not only traded, but also shared each other's stories, beliefs, and traditions. In these markets, not only local goods were available, but also rare products from distant lands. Spices from India, gold and precious stones from Egypt, copper and silver from Anatolia, all these enriched the markets of Mesopotamia. But the most interesting aspect of this trade was that it was not limited to physical goods. Imagine that knowledge, ideas, and cultural riches were also transported through these routes. A trader shared not only his goods, but also the stories, myths, and religious beliefs he brought with him. The markets of Mesopotamia were a microcosm of the world, a crossroads of different languages, different beliefs, and different ways of life. The development of trade in Mesopotamia also shaped the structure of society. Merchants were not only those who carried goods, they were the ones who built bridges between civilizations. In every marketplace you could find traces of different cultures. You could see a Sumerian farmer and an Indian merchant meeting in the same market. In Mesopotamia, trade had become a way of life, and the civilization was in constant interaction with other civilizations. This interaction was not just an exchange of goods, it was also an exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural values. For example, it would not be wrong to say that Mesopotamia's first writing system, cuneiform, developed in response to the needs of trade. Merchants needed a system to record their goods and put their agreements in writing. Thus, writing emerged. Writing developed and spread along the trade routes of Mesopotamia, and after a while it spread beyond trade to many fields such as law, literature, and religion. Just like that, the trade routes of Mesopotamia were the arteries of human history, carrying not only physical wealth but also knowledge and cultural heritage. Thanks to these roads, Mesopotamia transformed from a village into a civilization, and from a civilization into a legend. Math, astronomy, and the secrets of time. In the fertile soil of Mesopotamia, not only agriculture but also the seeds of thought were sown. As people looked up at the sky, they observed the dance of the stars, the cycle of the moon and the sun rising and setting the same way every day. This was not just curiosity, but knowledge that was necessary to organize their lives. But imagine that life at that time was not limited to the cultivation of the land. People's eyes were turned to the sky. The stars, the planets, the cycles of the moon, all this was like a mystery, a riddle. And it was to solve these riddles that the Mesopotamians turned to mathematics and astronomy. As they explored these sciences, they were able to reach not only beyond time, but also the limits of humanity. Mathematics was highly developed in Mesopotamia, especially during the Sumerian period. Of course, this development did not happen overnight. At first, it was necessary for agricultural activities. Fields had to be measured, crops had to be counted, warehouses had to be filled to overflowing. But over time, mathematics became more complex. They developed two different number systems, one of 10 and the other of 60. Notice that even today, an hour is 60 minutes and a minute is 60 seconds. This number system has survived to this day as a legacy of Mesopotamia. Beyond numbers, operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division were also of great importance. While the Mesopotamians engraved these operations on stone slabs in cuneiform, they also made mathematics a part of their daily lives. And this mathematics was used not only for agriculture, but also for understanding the sky. The first astronomers of Mesopotamia meticulously observed the movements of the celestial bodies and recorded the cycles of the moon and the sun. With these observations, they were able to calculate when the year began and ended, and when it was time to sow and harvest. Imagine that the stars were not just a source of light in Mesopotamia, they were like a compass that measured time, the rising and setting of the sun, the cycles of the moon. All of this was in order, and the people of Mesopotamia were aware of this order. Especially the movements of the moon taught them how to make calendars. The Mesopotamians laid the foundation for the calendars we use today. 12 months, 30-day months, all of them were born out of Mesopotamia's great interest in the sky. Of course, it was also important to record all this information. This is where cuneiform comes into play. Imagine there was neither paper nor ink at that time. But the Mesopotamians overcame this obstacle and developed cuneiform. At first they were just simple signs, but over time these signs were used to write contracts, trade agreements, and even religious texts. Cuneiform was the first pen, the first book of humanity. Even today, those clay tablets carry us information from thousands of years ago. At that time, scientific studies went beyond agriculture and sought answers to bigger questions. Why do the stars move? Why does the sun rise in the same place every day? Scholars seeking answers to these questions were able to pass on their findings to the next generations thanks to writing. The information recorded in cuneiform became the heritage not only of one generation, but of all humanity. Schools in Mesopotamia were like temples of knowledge. Here young minds learned cuneiform, mastered the intricacies of mathematics, and tried to unravel the secrets of the sky. Education was open not only to the children of the elite, but also to merchants, priests, and even farmers, because sharing knowledge helped society to progress further. This prevalence of education explains why Mesopotamia was such a great civilization. Developments in mathematics, astronomy, and time calculation were used by later civilizations, and Mesopotamia's scientific heritage left a deep mark on human history. Imagine that not only fields but also minds were cultivated and harvested in these lands. Numbers with mathematics, the sky with astronomy, and thoughts with cuneiform. In Mesopotamia, science and knowledge were revered as if they were sacred. And that is why Mesopotamia was not only the cradle of the first civilizations, but also one of the most important turning points in human history. Assyria, the mighty warrior kingdom of Mesopotamia. From the very first day the Assyrians emerged on the stage of history, they made a name for themselves not only through their strength but also through their cleverness and innovative military tactics. This kingdom held such a prominent place among other civilizations that it left a lasting mark not just with its military successes but also with its architecture. While its kings were celebrated for their conquests and victories, the cities and palaces they built were passed down through generations in legendary tales. Let's first think about the Assyrian kings. They were not merely rulers seated on thrones. They were leaders who led their armies into battle. One of these kings was the famous Ashurbanipal. Not only was Ashurbanipal a warrior, but he was also a wise man. He is remembered for his library in Nineveh, known for its emphasis on culture and knowledge. However, the Assyrian kings weren't solely interested in books. For them, the most important thing was to expand their territories and continually push the borders of their kingdom. Each conquest further solidified Assyria's power. Another significant figure was Tiglath-Pileser II, Ashurbanipal's predecessor, who revived the Assyrian state, implemented military reforms, and conquered neighboring kingdoms one by one. The Assyrian army was known as the most advanced war machine in Mesopotamia. So what was the secret behind this army? The Assyrians were pioneers of military innovation. Their army was not just about brute force, they defeated their enemies through tactical genius. Their military organization and strategies laid the groundwork for modern armies. They made significant advancements in the use of iron weaponry. When bronze was replaced by iron, the Assyrian army became virtually invincible. The Assyrians were also famous for their war chariots, which stormed the battlefield with a speed that struck fear into their enemies. These chariots, equipped with strategically placed archers and spearmen, were not only fast but also deadly. Moreover, the Assyrian army revolutionized siege techniques. They had mastered the art of capturing walled cities. Innovations such as siege towers, battering rams, and trench digging played a crucial role in the Assyrians' military successes. By breaking down the walls of their enemies, the Assyrian army instilled fear throughout Mesopotamia with these victories. However, these successes were achieved not only through violence and destruction but also through military intellect. The Assyrians didn't just rely on being strong, they developed psychological tactics to demoralize their enemies. In conquered lands, they carried out some ruthless practices to demonstrate how dangerous it was to oppose Assyria's power. This established Assyria not just as a war machine but as a fearsome empire that ruled over all of Mesopotamia. Now, let's talk about Nineveh. The pinnacle of Assyrian grandeur came to life in the magnificent architecture of the capital, Nineveh. This city was a colossal settlement reflecting the power and wealth of the Assyrian kings. The palaces, temples, and massive walls of Nineveh showcased that Assyria was not only a kingdom of war but also a center of culture and art. The famous library established by Ashurbanipal in Nineveh is one of the oldest and largest repositories of knowledge in the world. Thousands of clay tablets containing written texts were preserved here for future generations. Ashurbanipal's passion for knowledge ensured he was remembered as both a warrior king and a patron of culture. Assyrian architecture was not just about grand structures, it also represented significant progress in art. In particular, reliefs depicted the victories of the Assyrian army, the king's relationship with the gods, and hunting scenes. These reliefs were artistic expressions that reflected the power and glory of the Assyrian people. The images carved into the walls served as reminders that immortalized the victories of the Assyrian kings. Not only the kings, but also their hunting scenes, successes in battles, and offerings to the gods found a place in these artworks. In conclusion, the Assyrian kingdom etched its name in history not just on the battlefield, but also in architecture and art. The conquest-driven passion of its kings, the innovative tactics of the Assyrian army, and the majestic structures of Nineveh defined this kingdom's unique place in Mesopotamian history. Each conquest, each victory contributed to Assyria's growth not just physically but also culturally. This civilization is remembered as one where war and art intertwined, blending power and knowledge into a remarkable legacy. Imagine wandering through the ancient stone streets of Mesopotamia, at the heart of its ancient cities, temples rising in the shadows of kings, the prayers of priests, and the daily hustle of the people. This is where one of history's oldest class systems took root. The social divides between kings, priests, and ordinary citizens ran so deep that each lived almost in their own world. Yet these worlds were so interconnected that the power of kings stemmed from their ties to the gods, while the priests drew their strength from loyalty to the kings. Let's first consider the kings. In Mesopotamia, a king was not merely a ruler. He was also the earthly representative of the gods. He governed the land in the sight of the divine, winning wars and dispensing justice for his people. Their power relied on the sacred legitimacy bestowed upon them by the gods. While kings sat in their palaces engaged in war and diplomacy, priests connected with the gods in their temples. They were the interpreters of divine signs guiding the kings. Without priests, a king's power would feel incomplete. Indeed, the priests, in communication with the gods, earned great respect in Mesopotamian society. They were not only spiritual guides but also guardians of social order. However, the ordinary people lived outside this splendid life. Farmers toiled in the fields, artisans crafted goods, and merchants hustled, all while they struggled daily for survival. Kings and priests lived in luxury. The differences between them were not limited to social status. The lives of the people were filled with physical labor. Yet this very labor formed the foundation of Mesopotamia's greatness and wealth. The wheat grown by farmers, the goods sold by merchants in far-off lands, and the items produced by artisans all nourished the veins of Mesopotamia's power and prosperity. And then there were the women. The status of women in Mesopotamian society was quite complex. Some women, especially those from noble families or those serving as temple priestesses, were held in high regard. Temple priestesses, as sacred figures serving the gods, occupied a respected position. However, life was far from easy for ordinary women. Often engaged in household chores, child-rearing, and agricultural work, they occupied the lower rungs of society. Women's rights were generally tied to their husbands or fathers. Nevertheless, Mesopotamian laws did recognize certain rights for women. In matters such as divorce and property ownership, they were seen as equal to men. Still, this was not universally applicable. The vast majority of women raised children at home, worked in the fields, or engaged in small craft work to make ends meet. As for slaves, they stood at the very bottom of society. Those captured in wars or unable to pay their debts became slaves. In Mesopotamia, slavery was one of the harshest forms of personal ownership. Yet, interestingly, some slaves had the chance to earn their freedom. Those who repaid their debts or served faithfully for long periods could regain their liberty. However, this was a rare occurrence, and most slaves were condemned to serve their masters for life. Now let's turn to art and literature. Mesopotamia is known not only for its powerful kings and grand temples, but also for its art and literature. Sculpture and stone carving were executed with great mastery. Especially the reliefs found on the walls of temples or palaces depicted the wars of the time, hunting scenes, and offerings made to the gods. This stone craftsmanship was like a book of history. Each carving immortalized a story. Additionally, decorative arts flourished in this culture. Temples and palaces were built not only for strength but also for aesthetic beauty. The intricately worked stones reflected both respect for the gods and artistic expression. And of course, literature. Mesopotamia is home to one of the oldest works of world literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This epic is not just a tale of heroism, it's a masterpiece questioning what it means to be human. Gilgamesh is a demigod king, and his quest for immortality embodies profound philosophical reflections on human life and death. His journey is not just a king's saga, but a reflection of humanity's eternal quest. The death of his friend Enkidu forces Gilgamesh to confront mortality, inspiring him in his search for immortality. As a part of Mesopotamia's cultural heritage, this epic has been told for generations and remains one of the foundations of world literature. The rich culture of Mesopotamia reflects a historical legacy that spans all layers of society. The power of kings, the spiritual guidance of priests, the daily struggles of the people, the social status of women and slaves. And in the midst of all this, art, literature, and architecture rose. As one of the oldest civilizations in human history, Mesopotamia continues to inspire us today, not only with its material power, but also with its cultural and artistic wealth. The majestic walls of Babylon, once soaring toward the sky with its immense towers and gardens filled with legends, yet no matter how grand and powerful an empire is, none can last forever. Babylon, too, bowed to the inevitable cycles of history, and during this time the rise of the Persian Empire emerged. To understand the fall of Babylon, we must take a step back. Under King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon was adorned with wonders like the famous hanging gardens and massive ziggurats, symbolizing wealth and power. However, the kings that followed Nebuchadnezzar lacked the ability to maintain this splendor. Slowly, Babylon weakened under internal strife and administrative failings. By the time of the last king, Nabonidus, the city had become vulnerable to both external and internal threats. The once mighty Babylonian army was now weak and disorganized. The people grew restless with the indifference of their rulers and the religious policies being imposed. In such a tumultuous period, King Cyrus of Persia set his sights on Babylon, eager to carve his name into history. In 539 BC, when the Persians entered Babylon, they encountered almost no resistance. Imagine that Babylon, this enormous city renowned for its powerful walls, almost surrendered silently, without bloodshed. This was a testament to Cyrus's cleverly executed strategy and a sign that the Babylonian people were yearning for change. Upon entering Babylon, Cyrus showed great respect for the ancient city and its culture. He did not touch the temples, offered his reverence to the gods, and won the hearts of the people. The Persians often pursued a policy of cultural respect and tolerance in the lands they conquered. With the fall of Babylon, the Persian Empire not only expanded its territories but also inherited Mesopotamia's rich cultural heritage. Instead of dismissing this legacy, they embraced it and integrated it into their own empire. Here we begin to see the influence of the Persians on Mesopotamia. They assimilated Babylon's rich culture, art, and science into their own administrative systems. Cyrus's successors, Darius and his son Xerxes, continued to regard Babylon as a crucial center of their empire. Darius contributed to the reconstruction of Babylon's temples, allowing the city to retain its ancient glory. The Persians' respect for Babylon enabled them to preserve Mesopotamia's ancient cultural and religious heritage. However, the Persian influence was not limited to cultural tolerance. Their administrative systems were heavily inspired by Mesopotamia as well. The Persians adopted Babylon's bureaucratic structure and advanced management systems. Darius expanded the written legal system established in Babylon and spread it throughout the Persian Empire. They also took note of Mesopotamia's advanced agricultural and irrigation techniques, which were adopted by the Persians. Let's also mention the impact of the Persians on Mesopotamian art. The Persians embraced Babylon's architectural and artistic heritage, constructing buildings that showcase these influences in their imperial capitals like Persepolis. The massive walls, ziggurats, and the stunning hanging gardens of Babylon profoundly influenced Persian architectural understanding. The capitals of Persia were adorned in a style that reflected Babylon's grandeur and elegance. For instance, the colossal columns and stone carvings at Persepolis echoed the intricate details and grand scale of Babylonian art. Moreover, the Persians adopted a progressive approach to religious tolerance. With Cyrus's conquest of Babylon, religious practices within the city were freely allowed. The Persians showed respect for Babylonian deities, facilitating the acceptance of their new rule by the populace. This tolerant attitude ensured the continuity of Mesopotamia's rich religious heritage during the Persian Empire's reign. Temples continued to exist as sacred spaces for both local and Persian gods. Babylon, dominant in trade routes, once again became a commercial hub under the Persian Empire. Mesopotamia was utilized by the Persians as a bridge between the East and West. Babylon's strategic location led to its being a center for trade and cultural exchange within the Persian Empire. Thus, Babylon transcended being merely a city and became a cultural crossroads between empires. In conclusion, the fall of Babylon and the rise of the Persian Empire mark a pivotal moment in Mesopotamian history. Yet, this story is not just about the end of one empire, but about how another embraced and evolved this ancient culture. The Persians not only preserved Mesopotamia's legacy, but also blended it with their own cultural fabrics, creating a new civilization. This process, beginning with Babylon's decline, ensured that Mesopotamia continued to thrive, both physically and culturally. Ah, my dear friends, today we embarked on a long journey through the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, among the oldest and greatest empires of time. We explored the rise of civilizations flourishing behind those roaring city walls, the bustling markets along trade routes, the splendor of kings, and the lives of people growing under the shadows of the monumental structures they built. From the glory of Babylon to the rise of the Persians, from the brutality of wars to the quiet victories of science and art, I tried to convey each detail as if we were reliving those moments together. This land is where perhaps the greatest stories in human history were written. The legacy left by these great civilizations is not merely made of stone and brick. It embodies thought, culture, and the power of the human spirit. Even if Babylon's walls crumble and the Persians conquer these lands, the influence of Mesopotamia is eternal. Despite the destructive forces of time, everything created by the people here has echoed throughout history like an endless resonance. And we can still hear that echo in written texts, in epics, and in the works that continue to exist today. By the end of this long and profound journey, perhaps you've come to realize one more thing. My dear listeners, history is not just a sequence of events that happened in the past. History is a great mirror that shapes our present and builds our future. When we look into that mirror, we see not only ancient empires, kings, and victories, but also the unchanging quest of the human spirit. Knowledge, discovery, justice, freedom, these are the values that grew in the heart of Mesopotamia, seeds that can never be lost. Now we have come to the end of our tale. During this time we've sat around the fire, I was able to share with you a portion of this ancient wisdom. However, I know that the story of Mesopotamia is far from over. This land has much more to say. In our next gathering, we will open the doors to other realms, following the traces of other kings and other civilizations. Thank you for accompanying me on this long and enchanting journey. And remember, history is always with us, always by our side. Understanding it is understanding ourselves. Now rest, find your peace, and until we meet again, to discover more stories, good night, my dear friends.